Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. In this video we are going to make a flow map with Blender using geometry nodes and animation nodes. This technique is completely procedural, so you can use this flow map for any mesh object, and you can control the flow direction with curve object or with the grease pencil. See. Before we start, a quick announcement. I have created my Patreon page, so where you can follow me, support me, and download the finished project files as well as the tutorial files. So let's get started. So for the flow map, we are going to utilize the object UV maps. So to apply a texture to any 3D model, we have to specify the UV maps for that object, or basically the UV coordinates, because UV map define the texture coordinate on the surface of the 3D model. So if you want to move the texture on the 3D surface, we have to offset the UV coordinates. So if we want to create some kind of flow by offsetting the UV maps by a large amount, it's going to stretch or compress the texture in certain direction. This is a problem, so we can't use a single UV map. So instead of single UV map, we are going to use a 2 UV map with this kind of offset. So first UV map we're going to offset like this function, and for the second UV map we're going to offset with the same function but with the half phase difference. So we get texture something like this, and then we're going to mix these two textures with the factor, this triangular wave factor. So if we do that for a couple of frames, we can see that we get a smooth transition between these offsetted textures with this mix factor. So this is the main idea or concept behind the flow map, and for that we are going to make a node setup with the geometry nodes and animation nodes in Blender. So let's go to the Blender. So in this case I'm going to make a flow map for a river, and a river pattern I'm going to control with the curve object. For this we have to subdivide this plane for a bunch of times, because we are using UV maps. So if we have a less number of subdivision, it will create some kind of artifacts. So we need enough number of subdivisions to make this technique work. So let's add UV maps for this object. So let's name this as a base, and then we're going to add 2 UV maps, UV map 1 and UV 2, and I'm also going to add another UV map just for the mask, because I'm using Eevee render engine. Custom attributes doesn't show up or doesn't work in Eevee, so I'm going to store them in the mask UV map. So let's add the geometry nodes. Now let's add the curve object, and that going to define the shape of the river. We're going to create a mask based on this curve, and that we will use to offset the UV maps. So let's add attribute proximity node. Let's add this Bezier curve object here, and by the way I am using Blender 3.0 and with the latest version of animation nodes and extra node. And then we need to convert this to points. I'm going to use length and connect this as a target, also use relative. Now we're going to store, change this to point, and we're going to store this as distance attribute. To see this attribute in the viewport, Let's convert this to our mask UV map. Change this to 2D vector. Change this to dist. Here change this to mask. So now in the shading tab, let's add that UV map mask. Now you can see that. Now we can see the attribute in the viewport, and to further control this I am going to also add map range node. Change this to a smoother step and name this is the dist, and I am going to store with another name as dist m. And because we want the effect only near to the curve, not outside or away from this curve, so we have to invert this and maybe 6.5, and let's change this to 5 or something, 0.75. You can adjust this parameter. Later I will show you. This basically control the how much offset of the UV map. So basically 0.75 is good enough. Now we have to make this offset factor like this sawtooth wave. So let's first add the value node to bring the time here. Frame. Now we have time. So then I'm going to add a math node and change this to multiply. This is basically the speed. Let's change this 3.5. Now let's add another math node and change this to modulus and set this value to 1. So now this value is like a sawtooth wave, and I'll show you. Let's add a attribute math node, change this to multiply, float, and multiply by this this offset. And name is dist m, and we're going to store this as scale 1 and change this to scale 1. Now if we play the animation, see we have this sawtooth offset. Next we going to make this sawtooth offset with phase difference half. So let's add another math node and add the phase difference 0.5. Then going to add the modulus 1. So now we have with some phase difference this and this. Now let's offset this first UV map. Now we have this first scale. Then we need a vector math node because UV map is a vector. So change this to scale, this change this to vector, and first let's offset this UV map along the x-axis. This is our scale, and this I'm going to store this as offset 1. Now we're going to add this offset to the UV map. change this to attribute. This is UV1 and this is offset scale, and this. So actually we can't offset the UV map at the same time and store into the same UV map. So that doesn't work because of the current geometry node system. So we have to first offset this and store as a new attribute like UV1 new, and then we're going to convert that into that UV1 new to UV1. So we have offsetted the UV map 1. Now we're going to offset the UV map 2. So let's duplicate this, then connect this to geometry and this to this geometry, and multiply this with this offset 2. So change this to 2 2 2, then UV map 2, offset 2, and UV map 2. Then we're going to convert that UV map 2 new to UV map 2. So this is done. Now let's go to the shading. So let's view the UV map 1. See, it is offsetting. Then we have UV map 2. Yeah, so it is more visible. Let's add the textures. I'm going to use this noise texture, and let's add for this, and connect this to this. Also change this to 2D and this to 2D as well. Now we have to mix these two textures with this kind of mix factor, this triangular wave factor. So let's add this mix RGB. Now let's create that triangular wave mix factor. So first add the value node. Let's bring that frame. Now add the math node. Change this to multiply. This is our speed, and keep in mind that this speed value and this speed value should be same. So later you can control both the node with the animation nodes and set the same values. For the time being, I am going to putting the same value in both the nodes. So then add the math node, change this to modulus and set this to 1. Now we have this sawtooth wave. Then we're going to subtract this by 0.5. Now we have sawtooth wave from minus 0.5 to 0.5. Then multiply this with 2. We have sawtooth wave from minus 1 to 1. Then we're going to add absolute node. Now we have a triangular wave from 0 to 1. Let's connect this to the mix RGB node. Let's put this in a group and call this as mix factors. Okay, we have a smooth flow of texture. Now let's add bump node, and also we're going to add our mask UV map, and with this we are going to control the effect on this noise texture. So if I plug directly into this, you can see that everywhere we have this noise that we can limit with this mask UV map. We have this, and then add math node and multiply this, and then plug this into the height. And let's change this color to a black. See that? And one thing is, here we are storing the scale, but we have to store the dist_m. Okay, this our mask from the curve, not this scale. So now we can see that we have linked this. So you can also control the color or roughness with this mask. So it is working fine, but if we change or rotate this curve, we can see that flow is working, but it doesn't following the curve. So for that, for each mesh vertex, we have to find the nearest tangent of this curve and then use that tangent as a offset. So then the flow will follow along this curve. So for that we are going to use animation nodes. So let's add this spline from object nodes and select the Bezier curve, and then add the loop node, change this to spline data, and then we're going to evaluate this spline. So connect this to this and change this to step range. I'm going to 3.5. Now I'm going to output the location and tangent of this curve. Let's connect this and this. Let's connect this. I'm going to name this as locations and this as tangents. Now we have other locations and tangents. Now we have to first find the nearest locations for each vertex. Then we are going to use that indices to find the tangents. So let's add the mesh input node and select our plane, and then we need to construct the carry tree and also add the find nearest node, and we're going to find the locations which are nearest to these vertices. Now we have the indices, and let's add the get element node, change this to list, connect this to this tangents, and this are the indices. So now we have the nearest tangents for each vertex. Now let's store these tangent as a custom attribute. Let's add custom attribute node, add the plane, name this as tangent, and tangent because these are vectors. Now we have our tangents. So let's back to geometry nodes. Now here instead of this vector we have to use tangent, and here as well. Okay, now see, it is moving along this curve. And one thing I forget is that we have to normalize these tangents because they are not normalized. Sorry, let's add vector math node. We're going to normalize this to 1. Okay, so see, we have this flow, and so another thing we can add here is that because it is a river, so we can slightly add depth to this river. So for that, let's copy these nodes and connect this to this and this to this. So here we want to, based on this our mask, dist mask, we're going to offset this mesh along the normal of the mesh. Let's store this as a simple scale, and then we're going to scale the normal of the mesh with this scale as a offset, and then we're going to offset the position. Okay, so let me see this offset, sorry, is -25. See, we have this depth for the river and 1.5. And you can also add a multiple spline here as well. Let's change this switch direction. See, and I have created a material for this kind of river. So here it is. Map. So basically with this mask I am controlling the color as well as the roughness of the material. So we have this nice looking river. It is completely procedural and texture is also procedural. So, and this vector is basically control the spread of this mask, and this vector control offset of the UV maps. It is around 0.5 to 0.75 is good enough. Means if you really offset, this is going to completely stretch this texture, so create some kind of artifacts, but is around less than 1 is quite good enough. So this is it for this tutorial. In the next tutorial, I'll show you how to use the same setup to create this kind of effect and also break down my project files. So if you like this work, please do support me and subscribe to my channel for more updates. Until next time, happy noting. Bye.